Well, welcome to MissouriNet.com. I'm Bill Pollock, and of course, we're getting ready for the Tigers and UCF this Saturday, and another non-conference game after that with Indiana. But we've got to talk some SEC football, and so we bring in Phil Kornblut from SportsTalkSC.com. Joins us all the time, of course, with our sister network from the South Carolina Radio Network. Phil, you guys there in South Carolina have perhaps the best weekend of football planned. You have number 23 Clemson taking on number 1 Florida State, and then you have number 6 Georgia at number 24 South Carolina. People in that state have got to be buzzing right now with college football.
Oh, yeah. It's never a dull moment in this state during a college football season. You got the Gamecocks and the Bulldogs this week. Last week, a couple of weeks ago, you had Clemson and Georgia. Clemson and Florida State actually play on the 20th, so the Tigers are off this week. They get a chance to rest up a little bit. So we've got really and the Gamecocks next week go to Vanderbilt for their first road game. So it's coming at us fast and furious, and we're really in the state excited about anytime Georgia, South Carolina, Georgia, Clemson play. It's big in South Carolina simply because Georgia, such a great program right across the border, and rivals with both schools. So this is, the last 2 years we've had Georgia playing both of them because they had a 2-year home and home with Clemson. Of course, they play South Carolina every year. So it was really neat last year to have it twice, and then again this year. And we'll see how the Gamecocks and Bulldogs fare coming up Saturday in Columbia.
All right, so you've got Georgia. They're coming in off of the bye week. You saw them play Clemson, a 45-21 win. Todd Gurley, 198 yards. What can you tell us early on? Tell our Mizzou fans about Georgia in this division.
Well, they look really good in the second half against Clemson. Really, Clemson came out and stunned them in the first half, scored on their first possession, had an early lead, and the team sort of went back and forth trading punches in the first half. It was a 21-21 game at halftime, and then in the second half, Georgia just completely dominated Clemson. Clemson had 1 first down in the second half, no rushing yards. You mentioned Gurley. They gave him the ball more in the second half. He had the big kickoff return for a touchdown in the game as well. He is just truly a very special elite player, and you have to defend him first as an opponent defensive coordinator. You have to account for Gurley. Hudson Mason is their quarterback. He's a 5th-year senior, finally getting his chance to show his stuff, and he was very efficient against Clemson. But they are a little bit thin at wide receiver, and I would say that, if you want to try to slow Georgia down, then you have to play the run and put 7 in the box, and do your best to shut down the running lanes for Gurley and take your chances with the passing game. They're missing 2 of their top receivers right now because of injury, so they're a little bit thin at that position. And again, Mason looked good against Clemson. He looked pretty poised. Clemson was never able to rattle his cage, so to speak. So he had a pretty good day throwing the ball against them too. They had a complete offensive effort against the Tigers. So they've had 2 weeks to get ready for South Carolina as well. But if I'm South Carolina, my approach is Gurley's not going to beat me. I'm going to make sure I keep him within a reasonable amount of yardage. He's going to get his yards because he's that good, but I'm not going to let him run for 150 yards and 3 or 4 touchdowns. If anybody's going to beat me, it's the quarterback, and I'll take my chances there.
Well, and that's exactly what I was going to ask you. We're talking with Phil Kornblut from SportsTalkSC.com about this upcoming game, a big SEC East game already with Georgia and South Carolina on Saturday. And you talk about wanting the quarterback to beat you. Let's go back to week 1 for the Gamecocks, and that's exactly what happened in that Texas A&M game. South Carolina off to somewhat of a slow start. What's going on there? Take us back to that A&M game, and then we'll kind of work up through East Carolina and to where they're at now. But from your viewpoint, what happened in that first game?
Well, that first game, they got beat by the quarterback. They got beat by the running backs. They got beat by the towel boys. They got beat by the training crew. Everybody on Texas A&M beat them in that game. I think the Gamecocks were way, way, way up in the clouds for that game. They had been reading and hearing for months how good they were supposed to be. They were going to win the East. Texas A&M, no Johnny Manziel, no Mike Evans. They were ripe for the picking, and they bought into it too much, and they came out and they didn't play with a whole lot of enthusiasm and energy. The sideline was pretty flat. This is something that Spurrier has mentioned a couple of times since the game, and it showed on the defensive side. Offensively, Dylan Thompson did not have a bad game. He had 2 long touchdown passes, threw for well over 300 yards. They had 400 and some odd yards of offense. Ordinarily, if you had told me they were going to score 28 points going in, I would have said that's a sure victory for South Carolina, because we've grown accustomed to the defense doing the job. Well, the defense didn't do their job. They didn't even show up. And the only thing that kept this thing from becoming even worse was the clock running out. Texas A&M could do whatever it wanted to on offense. I think that was a rude wake-up call for South Carolina and their defense, and they played much better against East Carolina last Saturday. Even though they still gave up 450 yards, East Carolina's got a very good offense and a terrific passing quarterback and very good receivers. They're going to get theirs. But South Carolina was much more aggressive on defense. They put pressure on the quarterback. They did come up with a couple of interceptions, and they just didn't look like they were stuck in the mud like they did against Texas A&M. So they're going to try and build on that effort, make some more adjustments, and see if they can improve even more against Georgia. South Carolina has some young guys that are playing for the first time. It showed in that first game. They showed improvement in Game 2. They also made some lineup changes in Game 2 that paid off, and so now they'll try and build on what they did against East Carolina.
But they were still, though, when you look at it, I mean, they were still, I think they had a 4-point halftime lead, got to within a touchdown. They were within a touchdown, East Carolina was, of South Carolina. So have they fixed everything? Are they close? Is this going to be a close game? Because I know history is certainly on the Gamecock side when it comes to playing Georgia at Williams-Brice Stadium. But are they close? Can they take this game from Georgia?
They can beat Georgia. Now, East Carolina's good. They're going to be a 9 or 10 win team in their league when it's all said and done. They've got a good football team, so it's no surprise that was a fourth quarter game. South Carolina at home can beat Georgia. Georgia has had a lot of trouble in Columbia since 2000 at least, scoring points. They've averaged in 7 games in Columbia since the 2000 season. Georgia's only averaged 12.5 points per game. Now, they did win 4 of those 7 games that were played, but the last 2 times they really have had no offense in Columbia. We'll see. Their offense against South Carolina's defense, it might be a different story this time around. But in Columbia, South Carolina opened as a 2.5-point favorite. It's grown to about 6. I'm sorry, a 2.5-point underdog, and it's grown to about 6. But in Columbia, kind of feeling like they do this week, knowing that it's South Carolina as far as the East is concerned. Now they've put themselves in a position where it's a must-win situation. They have to beat Georgia to stay alive in the SEC East race. They lose and they're out. So if they don't respond in kind with that kind of desperate effort, I'll be very surprised. So, this is a game definitely South Carolina can win. Might very well win. I wouldn't pick them right now, having seen Georgia, having seen South Carolina, knowing how good Georgia can be on offense. And let me mention that Georgia's defense is not all that bad either. They like I said, they shut Clemson down in the second half. So I wouldn't pick South Carolina to win. I'd certainly pick Georgia. But I think it's going to be a fourth quarter game that could go either way when you talk about the last 7 or 8 minutes.
Yeah, and this is one of those matchups, Phil, where you look at the SEC schedule as a whole, and I was talking about this here on MissouriNet.com that for Missouri, once they get through their non-conference schedule, they're at South Carolina, they'll host Georgia, and then they go to Florida. By Halloween, they could be out of this thing, and for South Carolina, by Sunday, they could possibly be out of this thing, or by the end of the month, depending on how things go with Missouri. That's a lot of pressure on teams, a lot of pressure on SEC teams that this conference goes through that other conferences don't. Did we lose you?
No, I'm with you. It dropped out for just a moment.
Okay.
Well, South Carolina, I'm sure if I look at their schedule, I'm right about this. I think they're the only team in the league that opened up with 2 league games within their first 3 games. So, they were put in a position to either get off to a good start in the league or find themselves behind the 8 ball. And so by losing at home to Texas A&M, obviously that puts them behind the 8 ball now moving forward. That's what they knowing that 2 losses historically for them, 2 losses have been too many to win the division for the most part. So another loss in all likelihood is going to eliminate them, at least theoretically, not mathematically, but theoretically will eliminate them from the SEC East. So they've got to approach the rest of their league games in that manner. At least this Georgia game, because it's in the East. If they lose to Georgia, then you're now Georgia will be 1-0, you'll be 0-2, and Georgia will have the tiebreaker. So you're basically over 2 games behind Georgia after the first 2 games of the SEC season. That's hard to overcome, considering you figure Georgia might not have more than 1 or 2 losses on their schedule.
Yeah, absolutely. Phil Kornblut from SportsTalkSC.com. Appreciate having you with us. Some good insights. It'll be a great weekend to watch, and certainly I know Mizzou needs to keep their eyes on this game because both these teams are going to be up on their schedule soon. And you know what? Yeah, you're certainly right. I mean, 1 loss is certainly bad, two in the SEC. But in this division, though, I think it's wide open between those 4 teams. And I think you're going to see each one of these teams lay an egg. And maybe South Carolina's egg was laid in that first week with A&M. I don't see any of these teams really pulling away and dominating. I don't see Florida pulling away. While Georgia had a good first week, I'm not sold on Hudson Mason yet. I still think that there's an egg to be laid there, and there's some questions for Missouri too. So if you're going to have a slow start for a season, this would be it for South Carolina. That's my words of wisdom for you.
You make a good point. Yeah, you make a good point. I mean, over the last few years, even when South Carolina has been doing a lot of good things, they've always had that one game where they just stunk it up and ended up losing. It was Auburn a couple of years ago. It was Tennessee last year. And that maybe, and your thought was exactly the one I had the other night. Maybe South Carolina has played their worst game, and they did it against Texas A&M. It was their lay the egg game, as you put it, and perhaps they're going to recover from that. Last year, their defense got off to a slow start. They got better and better and better as the year went on. By the end of the year, they were pretty good defensively. So maybe you're going to see the same thing here, but only time will tell. But they can't afford not to play their best game of the season against Georgia on Saturday. It's going to take their best game in every aspect to beat Georgia. There's no doubt about that.
Well, Phil Kornblut, thanks again, and we will catch up with you in a couple of weeks as we get ready for the Battle of the Columbias again.
That's right. Get that barbecue warmed up. I'm looking forward to some good Missouri barbecue once again.
Well, the guy who bet you, he ditched and went down to Houston, Texas. So I don't know if I'm that brave enough to throw barbecue your way, but maybe we can wager again. I may pick up the slack.
Looking forward to it.
All right. Thanks a lot, Phil, and thanks for watching us here at MissouriNet.com.